Because one of the things I hear most in my DMs on Instagram is, oh, I've done functional labs. Well, the blood work at your doctor is not a functional lab. They're very different. So could you break it down for somebody that is a little confused? What is the difference between traditional blood work and functional lab testing?
The so-called functional medicine practitioner is looking at some of the same blood work as the standard practitioner, CBC, chem panels, differentials, and metabolic panels, and things that doctors do run, but they use different ranges. So in standard medicine, the range is this big because that's what the population shows you. Well, absolutely not. So the new functional ranges are narrower. They're on the right track with that. It's not the lab tests. It's whose tests are these? Whose test does this belong to? And does it explain that person, why they are out of sorts or suffering in some way? People want relief from their symptoms, but if you only address that one area, maybe you need some progesterone or some testosterone or something. What you really need to do is find out what the original stressors were.
If you've been hanging out with Cris and I for any length of time, you most likely know we are a test, don't guess company. We have worked with thousands of women all over the world. We've been doing this in the online space since 2019. And over the years, we've truly seen the difference that running functional labs can have on a person's health. Because if you're not testing to see what those imbalances are alongside the symptoms you're experiencing, it's going to be very difficult to identify where those imbalances are actually coming from in the body. So we wanted to bring on an expert in the field. So we have on the lovely Reed Davis, who is the founder of FDN, which is the Functional Diagnostic Nutrition Certification Course. He's a board certified doctor of functional nutrition and a holistic health practitioner. He serves on the board of the American Association of Natural Wellness Practitioners, and his FDN course has trained over 5,000 practitioners across 50 countries, Cris and I included, and is a renowned expert in functional lab testing. So Reed has actually guided thousands of people towards drug-free solutions for chronic health challenges. And his acclaimed methodology at FDN has been built on years and years of experience as a health director, case manager, where he's reviewed countless. Like, Reed, how many labs do you think you've reviewed at this point in your career?
It'd be really hard to say, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, if you.
How many years have you been doing this for?
Since 1999.
Before it was a cool thing to do.
It was kind of quackery, actually, back then. I thought it was cool. That's what mattered. And the clients and patients we had at our clinic thought it was cool. So
I always love when Cris and I get to talk to practitioners that have been doing this before it was like the in thing to do, before it was all over social media. Everybody knew what a functional lab was, or, knew what gluten and dairy and all these things. Like back in 1999, for those of you that don't remember it, maybe you weren't even alive yet. It was a very different time, right, Reed? This was where it was low fat, low cal, aspartame and food dyes. Even though we still have some of those things today, it was such a different time back in 1999.
Yeah, there was people doing all the standard things that wasn't working, seeking alternatives. And then there's a lot of very enterprising practitioners who would come up with alternatives. The question was which ones were legit and which ones were just capitalizing on opportunity. Like selling supplements that didn't work, didn't interest me. It was what's really wrong with people. And so I spent the next 10 years after I decided I'd be the last person people needed to see. It was just very naive, but that's what I told myself. Everyone coming in our door had seen 6 or 8 practitioners. And so they were frustrated and they didn't want to be just sold the next gizmo product or service, or they wanted to know what's really wrong with me. And I had to say, I don't know, but we can find out. Again, I spent 10 years running thousands of labs on thousands of people, trying to sort out what's really wrong.
You start in this industry and there's a lot of symmetry. So even when I was going through your program, for example, some of the stuff like in the opening was like, oh, test, don't guess. Oh, we may never find the root cause. Oh, and I'm like, okay, hang tight. You're speaking my language here because we say this all the time, right? And we love testing. So we boast about it. We're really big into the HTMA because it just allows us to see the core front of nutritionists, right? Minerals. We love our minerals, right? So it gives a guiding point. So when you started, How did you know the next level was through functional testing?
I'm known for the experience and all the observations I made on my own from sheer volume of work. But I had great guidance. I had some good mentors. So these were guys who started labs, like a saliva testing company. Why? Because the typical blood work wasn't showing them what they wanted to see. So I became an expert in the alternative labs. Now a lot of them are called functional labs. A lot of them are just finally catching up to where we were 25 years ago. So labs are the key. There isn't enough really good labs. There's just enough to figure out some healing opportunities that would solve most common chronic downward spiraling stress related conditions. There's enough labs to do that. So that's what we do, and that's what I teach now.
When you look at the labs from when you started to what you're doing now, what's different?
Well, it's besides its popularity, which you mentioned, and I have seen the evolution go from alternatives. Our clients and patients were coming in our office for alternative, which was parts of it weren't even very well respected at all. Chiropractic and acupuncture and the early testing that we were doing. So the popularity and acceptance is really phenomenal. That alternative turned to complementary. Why? Well, because it complemented what doctors were doing. They still were kind of the boss, but hey, we better pay attention because this other stuff works. Then it became integrative because now patients are insisting, they're really pestering their standard practitioners to, well, what about this? This works for me. And so doctors started realizing that, and they're great market followers. And so then finally it's evolved into functional medicine, but it hasn't finished evolving. At least they're looking a little farther upstream for the underlying causes and conditions with some of the labs that we use. A lot of them they just still won't use because they can't diagnose. These are called research use only labs, even though we've been using them for 20 years. They're non-diagnostic tests for the most part. They just tell you what's wrong. What are the healing opportunities? What's different is that there's this much broader acceptance, and the lab technology itself has gotten better. So we've been able to develop some new labs, and now that I've got this much experience and I have 4,000 or 5,000 practitioners that I've trained, we can go to a lab and say, hey, we want you to add this marker to this test, and they will, because I have enough customers for them to make it worth their while. So that's kind of a part that's changed a lot. I only had my customers 25 years ago and 20 years ago. And I only developed the systems and the methodology for our clinic, for my practice. It's all I cared about was my patients, my clients coming in. Then finally, after 10 years, someone said, think of all the people you could help if you would train others in your system. And that made sense. So I put on my first class 15 years ago, and none of those people would leave me alone or go away. So now we developed a whole big program, of course, and have quite a community of which you're part. So that's a phenomenal thing.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it. Cris and I are always, up-leveling our knowledge and education because it's so important to stay at the forefront of, especially an industry that changes so quickly as new science emerges, new information emerges. I kind of want to switch gears here just a little bit because one of the things I hear most in my DMs on Instagram is, oh, I've done functional labs. And I say, oh, okay, well, what labs have you done? They're like, oh, just the blood work at my doctor. And I say, okay, well, the blood work at your doctor is not a functional lab. They're very different. So could you break it down for somebody that is a little confused? What is the difference between traditional blood work and functional lab testing?
Well, that's evolved too. That's a good question because that has improved. The so-called functional medicine practitioner is looking at some of the same blood work as the standard practitioner, CBC, chem panels, differentials, and metabolic panels, and things that doctors do run, but they use different ranges. So they're using what's called the functional range, which is where you think the numbers should be. So in standard medicine, the range is this big because that's what the population shows you. You test 1 million people, and well, they go from here to here, throw out some above and some below. If you're in that range, does that mean you're healthy? Well, absolutely not. So the new functional ranges are narrower. They're on the right track with that. But the question is, what should your, as an individual, levels be? because some people might be better off a little lower in the range, a little higher in the range. It just depends on the analyte you're looking at and that person. So what we teach in FDN, as you well know, it's not the lab tests. It's whose tests are these? Whose test does this belong to? And does it explain that person, why they are out of sorts or suffering in some way? So that's where the saliva testing, urine testing, stool testing, you mentioned hair testing and things like that. So they can explain a lot better sometimes and usually what's going on with that person. In other words, we're looking to measure healing opportunities. I still call it alternative, and we call it FDN. So the functional medicine practitioners are doing a better job. And they're also for the functional range, even though the population might show this, you should be in this narrower range. So that kind of explains functional ranges versus standard. It's a step in the right direction. But they're still not running the number of labs we run, the different systems and the way we look at them. HIDD and hormone, immune, digestion, detox. Just not a real criticism, but trying to provide some leadership in where it needs to go. You got to be looking at more healing opportunities. They still are very much stuck in the diagnosis and treatment model. That model just doesn't work as well as looking at a constellation of healing opportunities and then applying the principles of health building to all of those areas at the same time. So our protocols, as you know, work on every cell, tissue, organ, system simultaneously. Work on it all. The minute you lay down a diagnosis, on the other hand, you've got hypothyroid, you're irritable bowel, you're whatever it is, sort of automatically, and you treat that thing, then you're sort of automatically forgetting all the other stuff the person needs to do to be really healthy, to really correct everything on a permanent way or more permanent way. So they are doing good. They need to start leaning away from the diagnosis and treatment model, but that's going to be incredibly hard because that's how they get paid.
Especially if the education system leads our Western medical system, not in the ways of prevention. So I say to people, you go to the doctor and you have a cough, you have bronchitis. You go to the doctor and you have a sore knee, you have arthritis, right? I always say to people, when you go to the doctor, start asking why. Why do I have this pain? What's the connections? What's the contributors? And what do I get out of the diagnoses? Another little nugget is I always say, and how long am I on this med for? I think those are real big connectors when trying to disassociate holistic applications to Western.
Well, that's huge. And some of that comes along with the diagnosis and treatment model. And what are they treating? Are they treating the paper or the person? So back to what you guys well know, because you've been through the training, that it's the symptoms aren't what's wrong. They're not the problem. They're a result of the problem. And so are the test results. They're not the problem. They're the result of the problem. And so if you only try to manipulate the numbers through some agent and you focus on that one group of numbers or number, then you don't get the same results. You get much better results. Always asking, why is this person produced this set of numbers here? What can we do to get different numbers outside of the diagnosis and treatment model, which is like, oh, you're hypothyroid, here's your thyroid medication. That'll change the numbers. But, often it just perpetuates the poor lifestyle or whatever the choices that person's making or environment that person's in that produce those results. It's actually simple. It starts to sound complicated, but it's not.
So, Reed, when we're looking at the types of functional lab testing that you can be running, you briefly mentioned it, saliva, urine, hair, stool. Could you break down some of the most common functional labs and what markers they're looking for and the healing opportunities they're providing?
Broadly, you know that it's hormone and immune and digestion and detoxification, a couple other things. We look at oxidative stress and a number of things. With the hormones, we do use saliva. We can use dried urine and wet urine and blood. Lots of ways to skin that cat. But we prefer a test that can be done at home in your own time. It's also very bioavailable markers, levels and things. So we'd first look at the hormones in terms of the catabolic and anabolic balance in the body, cortisol and DHEA. And when that goes off, when a person's under stress of any kind, from anywhere, a lot of it chronic, they get out of balance. So when you're catabolic, your body's breaking down. It's aging faster, your time. Just ask an old guy. You're breaking down. Now, what the dominoes fall in a very predictable way to then the sex hormones go. So now you have testosterone and estrogen and progesterone imbalances, and your periods are off, and you're early menopause, and you're cranky, and maybe not. Lots of things got moodiness, irritability. As you are under stress and you're looking at salivary hormones, you're looking at the catabolic, anabolic primarily. Then the next domino default would be the sex hormone. And lots of symptoms come with that. So people want relief from their symptoms, but if you only address that one area, maybe you need some progesterone or some testosterone or something. What you really need to do is find out what the original stressors were. Because if that's all you do is get relief care, it's not a bad thing. We all want to feel better. But then the next domino to fall in the chronic stress-related conditions, they're very much downward spiraling. You just get worse. So one of the next things to fall would be the immune system. Stress, cortisol will suppress secretory IgA, which is in the lining of the gut, which is where most of your immune system is. And when that happens, the mucosal layer thins out, and now you get a dysbiosis. You have more bad bacteria than good. So we measure all these things. We measure the steps along the way, and we see this downward spiral. So that catabolic, anabolic imbalance, stress, your catabolic, your sex hormones go. You got all these symptoms. Well, the next thing is your immune system, which affects the biota, the microbiome. And now you've got a dysbiosis, so you got more symptoms. And it just downward spirals from there. You end up with, the medical term is bigger, badder bugs. Now you got infestation and biofilms and overgrowth, and now you really have a problem. And that affects, of course, digestion. Now you're not breaking down absorbing food. You end up with nutritional deficiency. So you can see this is very cyclical, but it's very predictable when you know which labs to run. And you end up with hyperpermeability. Now that lining of the intestine is so thin, and it doesn't have the right ingredients, and you end up with leaky gut. Well, now particles that aren't supposed to flow into the bloodstream, and then you set off the immune system even worse, and on and on. It's a very predictable downward spiral. That's what is real functional medicine, is always looking at those underlying causes. Forget any diagnosis or treatment at this point. Look for the causal factors, sort them out, give the person something to do to stop, decelerate, and then recover from the original inputs. And it works. It outperforms any other system. That's why we keep doing it.
So what we find is clients that come seek us is, first, we're not the first. We're probably not even the fifth avenue they've taken before they get to us. I always say we're kind of like the last resort, that I'll try this in hopes.
Because we are dealing with acne, right? They've tried the medical route, they've done the Accutane, the antibiotics, the birth control, the topicals, they've seen estheticians, they've most likely seen a naturopath. Like, they really have done the things.
To your point earlier, you do have people saying, like, you got the DM that said, well, I already ran a functional medicine test. Because functional medicine hasn't evolved farther enough along, they're still looking at one area, one problem, one fix. They're diagnosing and treating specifics. And in FDN, we don't treat anything specifically. We treat everything, every cell, tissue, organ system, simultaneously by bringing in the healing, the principles of healing. We depend a lot on the innate intelligence of the body, too, which is another area that is given a nod by functional medicine, but they like to intervene. They like to, we're going to fix this. They still use a lot of prescription medication. I encourage that area to continue to evolve, and we're there to help and try to lead the way, which is weird because we're not medical doctors, but we're scientists, and we're on the front lines working with people every single day.
Let's just talk a little bit, because we talk about these symptoms, because that's what people understand. They're symptoms, because like you said, the body has this innate response, and that response is symptoms. So again, when joining FDN and the symmetry, you call it metabolic chaos. I have a lineage which is very coinciding. So I always say, when people say to me, what's the root cause? And I mean, I'm sure Katie's heard this 700 times. Like, she's going to send me a birthday card with it on. But I always say, it's stress. And they say, well, what do you mean? As I said, it's a stressor. So whether that's an epigenetic distortion, there is a stress. that then causes an inflammatory response, which should be natural in your body. However, over time, what happens? It wears it down. Then we're going to have signs and symptoms. Then we're going to have disease, disorder, and illness. And how that whole lineage works is now I'm like, oh my gosh, Reed calls that metabolic chaos, which is so much fancier than my big long thing.
That was the most thing I was excited about in FDN Read, is that there was finally a term for what Cris and I have been trying to explain to our clients for years. And then when we were like, oh, it's metabolic chaos, what a perfect way to describe what is happening in the body.
Way easier.
So that term occurred to me in conversation as a perfect description of what was going on. I just latched onto it because it really did describe the reality in a person who has multiple causal factors, which, by the way, are interacting with each other. So instead of saying root cause, well, you know what I'm noticing is that there really isn't one. And again, they're affecting each other in ways that can't be singly measured in many cases, most cases. Therefore, it is metabolic chaos. That's not a cute phrase. It wasn't meant to be. It was just meant to be an actual description of the current circumstances. There's so much going on. It's chaotic, but that doesn't mean we can't sort it out. And that's the trick is, well, how do you sort that out? You look at the healing opportunities. Hormone, immune, digestion, detoxification, they're all happening simultaneously. You can work on them all simultaneously. I think you know that when I was in the office 25 years ago, I noticed people were coming in religiously, and we tell them, you need to come in 3 times a week for your treatment, and they do. But I would say that's not helping that much. It's helping, but what you really need to do is go home and behave yourself different. And that's where the DRESS came from. It was, what should I do at home? Eat right, go to bed on time, exercise, work on stress reduction, and take your supplements.
Because I think we live in this society where we're so used to being given a pill for any ill that we have. It's like, oh, you have this issue, just take this pill, it goes away. But when we're looking at really repairing the body, really working on those healing opportunities, restoring balance within the body systems, it's not just about taking a pill. It's not just about taking this one supplement and then you can keep going on living your life the way that you are without making any changes. Like you said, it really comes down to a lot of those lifestyle factors that we know we need to work on. It's like we need to be eating better. We need to be sleeping. We need to be reducing our stress levels. And there isn't going to be a supplement that's going to out-supplement poor diet, crappy sleep, and stress.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed people would still ask me, I'd go over their test results. Yeah, this and that. Here's all the things that can be corrected or improved. They would all say, what can I take? So you had to take a good look at this, what you're eating 3 times a day or more, and what time you're going to bed and all the stressors that are in your life, level of exercise. Some people actually were over-exercise. With most people, it's under. And the stress reduction was always huge. Here's another thing. In terms of root cause medicine, it's the right way to think, except for that some root causes don't even have to be there anymore. They could be gone. And there's research on this. UC San Diego, University of California. Big paper came out last year about the root cause could have disappeared moons ago, years ago. But the downward spiral in metabolism that it altered is still in effect and maybe even getting worse. As we look for these root causes, we look for the main ones. Again, hormone, immune, digestion, detox. We get markers that tell us what needs to be improved. And the rest of it is a journey for that person of self-awareness and discovery and responsibility, accountability to the laws of nature. So it kind of works perfectly. Just getting people to do it can be a challenge, but sorting it out isn't. We've got the science, we've got the labs, we've got the protocols customized on an individual basis. But then there's that mind thing. And if someone's obstacle to healing is in their mind and emotions, that can be a bit tricky to sort of weed out, find out what past things are keeping you from changing your behavior. So that's a whole nother show, but we can't leave it out when we think of these things.
That's a massive one, especially with our clients. Anything external, right? Weight, hair loss, aesthetics, that really has a confidence, just like a direct impact.
So we do all the labs, we do all the science and things, but I had a doctor friend of mine call me the other day and he just said he was feeling depressed. I told him, well, get a life. That's not what I said, but What's your purpose? What gets you up in the morning? Well, I'm not sure. Well, figure it out. Pick something. Go do some good in the world. Go help somebody and do something good in the world. Get a purpose, because that is existential angst, because you don't have a purpose in you. No wonder you're depressed. Matter of fact, that's how it works. If you want to be joyful and happy, have a reason to get up in the morning. At least that's a good start.
So I have another question that I'm curious to hear your answer on, because another thing that we've heard over the years of running functional labs, I want to say, I think, naiveness around functional labs. And we'll often hear people saying, well, my doctor said there's no merit in functional labs, that the information you get, isn't real. And what do you say to the people that are still having the difficulty understanding how important functional labs can be?
That's a common problem for people, is their doctor doesn't. They're so ingrained and so trained in what they do. By the way, a lot of times doctors are being trained by doctors who learned what they learned 20 years ago from people who were doing that 20 years before that. A lot of what we're doing, it takes a while to catch up and to become common knowledge, and even less of a common practice. So that's where functional medicine is evolving and starting to get more credibility to the things we look at, the markers that we look at. That person only needs to look at themselves and say, how's that working for you? Sometimes we do. It's a lot of reality checking for people. Well, my doctor says this and this and this. How's that working for you? Well, I hate taking the medication, and I'm still overweight and sad and no libido and can't build muscle and foggy thinking.
But that's normal, Reed. That's normal to feel like that, isn't it?
A lot of people just get complacent in their misery. Oh, that's all I deserve. I don't deserve. The obstacle to healing is in the mind and emotions. And so most of our most successful clients have a better outlook on life. They go, I know I'm not supposed to be like this. I know this. The doctor said there's nothing wrong with me, but he's wrong or she's wrong. I know there's something. I mean, how many of your audience, or you guys and your clients and things, have been told nothing's wrong with you by their doctors? Well, those are those big ranges, and as long as you're in it, you're okay. That's bull. So that's, at least, again, functional medicine's narrowing the ranges a bit, but there's so many more things you could look at. That's what we do. We're providing a lot of leadership in that area.
I know it's so frustrating when we have clients coming in every single day saying, my doctor said how I feel is normal. I'm crazy. It's in my head. It's part of being a woman. It's part of being mom. It's part of getting older. Like, these are the things we hear day in and day out. They're left feeling like it's hopeless. They're defeated. They have to have acne for the rest of their life, painful periods, headaches, brain fog, crappy sleep, whatever those set of symptoms. It's all perfectly normal.
So that's what you can expect.
Yeah, here's a medication, but that medication gives you a side effect, so here's another medication.
Yeah, you know the story I tell all the time. Lady comes in the office for chiropractic, on about her 8th visit, and I could tell she was really sad. What's wrong? I said, oh, it's this weight. I'm 40 pounds overweight, and it's really frustrating. And me being helpful, I always want to butt in and tell her what she should be doing, right? But she got her whole story out. She was 40 pounds overweight because she'd been on medication for the hives for 2 years, and 40 pounds later, she said she went to her doctor recently, and he said, lady, you got your choice. You can be fat or you can have the hives. And she said, well, that's depressing. And he said, I'll be happy to write your prescription for antidepressants. And so when I finally was able to say, well, first name, why don't we try to find out why you get the hives? Her head almost spun off her neck. What? What do you mean? Like, what a concept. Find out why you get the hives instead of medication that over 2 years didn't even work all the time. She still got the hives if she took hot showers or worked out to a sweat. She still, even then, on the meds, she would get the hives and 40 pounds. So we ran our labs, changed some things in her input, the signaling going into her body. We changed some things, food and chemicals and things. Within 9 days, she was off her medication, taking hot showers and working out to a sweat. So you know how good that feels, right? We don't practice heroic medicine, but it feels pretty heroic to have changed someone's life. That was 20 plus years ago. That let me know I was on the right track. Always look for that underlying cause, condition, the root cause. You may never find it, but you can have an effect upon it when you know these steps to take.
That's why Cris and I really love that term metabolic chaos, because we tell our clients underneath acne, we're dealing with poor gut health, which involves your immune system, poor detoxification pathways, hormonal imbalances, blood sugar, cortisol, sex hormones. these are all causes of acne. And they're like, okay, well, what is my exact root cause out of those things? And we say, okay, well, we may never be able to say, 60% of your acne comes from your gut and 40% comes from your hormones. But we can see where those imbalances within your bodies are lying for the healing opportunities for you to start self-healing, to bring down that metabolic chaos, to get your body system working cohesively.
I'm with you 100%. We help thousands and thousands of people with that exact methodology. We know it works.
We just don't care. We know it works. We're making people feel better. So I have another question that's been sitting in the back of my mind as we've been chatting. Now, over the years, as you've run all of these different labs, have you seen commonalities or trends within different labs, within different sets of people, or has it truly just been so vast and varied?
No, we're always looking for patterns. So that's a really good question. We see the patterns that we talked about, HIDD, and, most of our patients early on were women and still are. They just seem to care more about their health. Men care more about their cars, right? If women get an owie, they see about it. And it actually results in them living about 4 years longer on average than men. So women have longer health spans because they do pay attention and these things. So there's commonalities just like that, like just paying attention. When it comes to the labs, obviously, as I mentioned, the cortisol to DHA ratio, people are actually walking around in a chronic stress condition and don't even know it. To your point, Cris, they just think it's normal. Well, then why are you drinking 4 cups of coffee every day, and then needing alcohol to get to sleep at night? If everything was fine, you wouldn't need to self-medicate. From there, as the downward spiral progresses, they need prescription. Now coffee and alcohol doesn't do it anymore. You're going for, hey, doc, can you help me out? They're very good at symptom relief. They all have side effects and they're we don't want those things, but it's not our way. But they can relieve symptoms. And it's not a bad thing. To walk around miserable makes you a lot less motivated to change. So relief care is okay. You just don't want to rely on it forever. The first pattern that I recognized to your question was the self-medication because of the catabolic state, because they just need something. My energy, my thinking. That's why people smoke, believe it or not. It actually makes them feel better. It's a stimulant, and it clears the brain, and there's actually a lot of benefits to nicotine. Just that's probably the most horrible delivery system you could use. But you see what I'm getting at? So it's all for a reason. The catabolic, anabolic, as I've said, the next thing that goes to sex hormones. So now you don't have any libido and, you're gaining a few pounds and, again, the muddled thinking, these kind of things. So there's relief for that too. You can just go get some testosterone. That'll give you more energy for sure. But then as the downward spiral progresses into the immune system, thyroid, other areas, what are you going to do? Just keep you go to a different doctor and get more prescription or more. And it works that way in a lot of, this is very unfortunate, even with naturopaths and with nurses that are independent. You can chase the symptoms, end up in a vicious cycle. You can also chase lab test results. Just one lab, okay, here's your medication. This will change the numbers, but they're not fixing anything. Well, then a new symptom appears. Well, here, let's run another test. Oh, here's what you need for that one. Those are the patterns I recognize. It's faulty thinking in a way. It's not attempting to achieve the higher purpose and ideal of self-determination. That's how you get other patterns or trends, as you're asking, Katie, in diagnosis. When I started, fibromyalgia was the number one complaint. They've been told that's your diagnosis. They came into our office going, well, my doctor said I have fibromyalgia. So they're taking, painkillers and muscle relaxants and these things. They still aren't happy. They're still overweight and sad, can't think straight. So you don't hear that diagnosis a lot anymore. Everyone realized that was a garbage can diagnosis. If you don't know what it is, call it fibromyalgia and give them some pills.
I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia about 5 or 6 years ago. And I said, well, what's causing the fibromyalgia? And they were like, oh, we don't know. This is a medication you'll have to take forever. I'm like, well, that's not acceptable for me.
There's real fibromyalgia. And then there's like just the cluster of symptoms that gets labeled fibromyalgia. And so there's a lot of people suffering that they get classified. That's what's wrong with you. It's not everything that's going on. There's a lot more going on than your diagnosis. You are not your diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. And we always tell our clients that come in, they're like, I have IBS, I have PMS, I have chronic fatigue, I have fibromyalgia. Like, that's my diagnosis. And we say, okay, but those are actually sets of symptoms that you're experiencing. What is actually causing those sets of symptoms within the body? And they're like, oh, I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, exactly. I never thought about it, period. I just did what I was told.
So as we start to kind of wrap up, Reed, I'm curious is when you have a client come in and they're dealing with X, Y, and Z, before you get their labs back, of course, you want to start making some changes, start getting to feel it a little bit better while we wait for those labs to come in. So what are some of those like foundational things that you love for your clients to start doing while you're waiting for those labs to come back?
One of the things I have them do is go to a website called mtdiet.com and start trying to eat right in the meantime. Eat right for your metabolic type. Some people just really need to up their protein, for instance. But from that test, we can tell. You could do a food sensitivity test. Those come back pretty quick. You can at least start eating right. You want to bed on time. You start teaching the DRESS. There's hardly an epigenetic factor more powerful than diet. So epigenetic factors are the key. That's the signaling going into our genes that meet up with our genetic potential and will have an effect on that potential, of the expression of genes. It's called. I always have them start with the diet. Unless they're eating perfectly. You get people, I eat perfectly, so it's not that.
We see that all the time. I eat super healthy. There's nothing I can change.
Oh yeah, I only eat rice and beans or something, whatever it is. And I stand on my head in the corner with carrots, different things. But diet is really important. But if their weakest area is something else in the DRESS, so diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, supplementation. Oh, I eat perfectly. I take my supplements every day. You might just, okay, we'll see about that. And just have them focus on their weak area. Like, oh, but I can't exercise. I don't have time. I stay up till 2 watching movies every night, and I don't. So we could start on their weak area while you're waiting for the labs. Once you get to the labs, now you're cooking with gas, right? You guys have experienced this, and you know this well. So in the meantime, the lifestyle matters. There's also getting checked out by like a chiropractor or something to see if there's any pressure on nerves anywhere. If they're in pain, like physical bodily pain, on top of all the other stuff, then they should get checked out and start working on their physical body. The musculoskeletal system is critical. So I like chiropractic, but I've done acupuncture. I had plantar fasciitis once. My foot I couldn't get up in the morning. It's killing me. By noon, it was like warmed up a little bit. But man, I couldn't stand it. And I ended up going to acupuncture. Believe it or not, acupuncture fixed it. So there's other modalities that, say, an FDN practitioner might not be able to pull off, do adequately. So we like to get people examined by other practitioners as well. I've never once sold a chiropractic treatment to anyone or recommended a chiropractic treatment. I've recommended a chiropractic exam, though, thousands and thousands. Go see someone that might find another thing that we don't do. We're more of the internal chemical, again, hormones and immune system, digestion, making sure you're getting all the nutrients, and making sure you're offloading your toxins and things, and the energy production and the nervous system balance, all that comes into it. Might take a little teamwork sometimes. And people have to be, above all, willing to invest in it. And what better investment is there than your health?
This was such a great chat. And I know I always say this. I encourage you to go back and, again, listen to this again, because you'll pull additional nuggets. I know sometimes the more complex topics we cover can be a lot of information at once. So I think this would be one that you would love to go back, listen to again, pick out some of those really great nuggets that Reed had to share. So Reed, thank you so much for hanging out with Cris and I today. We loved this chat.
It is my absolute pleasure, and I'm always open for a return anytime.
We would be happy to do it. All right, everybody. So if you want to check out more about what Reed has to offer, what Reed does in a day, he's a pretty busy man. So what I did is in the show notes, you're going to be able to see that I've linked his Instagram, which is at FDN Training. And if you just DM him the word Reed, you'll be able to get access to a free workshop that he offers. It's a 5-in-1 workshop, completely free. So if you want to go learn a little bit more, check the show notes. I'll even link their website in there as well. Okay, everybody. Another episode here at the Clear Skin Chronicles. We will see you next week with another episode.
Great job, guys.